Kilmekamna, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Natives Engaged in Alzheimer's Research, or NEAR, webinar series. I'm Dr. Gary Ferguson. I am the Director of Outreach and Engagement and Research Associate Professor at Washington State University here in the Institute for Research and Education to Advance Community Health, or IREACH. I'm Unanga and an enrolled member of the Kagan tribe, and it gives me great pleasure to have a fellow Unanga presenting today, Dr. Jordan Lewis. Before we get started in our webinar, I'm going to go over our Zoom features today that will help you participate as robustly as possible in today's webinar. On the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat option, which you can use to send messages to all participants, or you can send a message directly to the hosts. There is a raise your hand feature. However, we may ask that you hold your questions until the end, as this there will be a designated question and answer time. Please do type your questions in at any point in time in the Q&A box in the bottom right. For today's webinar, I will provide a brief overview of IREACH as well as Natives Engaged in Alzheimer's Research, or NEAR. Then Dr. Jordan Lewis will give his presentation, Caregiving Made Me Wiser, Lessons Learned When Given a Second Chance with Your Family Member, and we'll end with a 10-minute Q&A session. After the conclusion of this webinar, you'll be given a chance to provide feedback through an evaluation survey. A recording of the webinar will also be available soon on the NEAR website, which can be accessed through our main page, ireach.wsu.edu. We will also send an email with the link as soon as it is posted. IREACH at Washington State University challenges the status quo and advances community health through partnerships and collaboration. We conduct research with rural, indigenous, Native, Latinx populations, health networks, and populations with substance use disorders. Our IREACH faculty belong to various colleges at Washington State University, and we partner with external collaborators at universities across the country. IREACH houses 3 primary research programs, including Native Health, formerly known as Partnerships for Native Health, Northwest Health Education and Research Outcomes Network, or Northwest HERON, which aims to improve the quality of clinical care and ameliorate health disparities in communities across Washington and surrounding areas. And Latinx Health is advancing Latinx health through the formation of community partnerships and focused academic research. The work we do with Native communities is focused on conducting community-based research and education to improve health and reduce health disparities amongst American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders. We do this by working with both community and academic partners in community settings. We focus on achieving health equity, community outreach and engagement, and training and education. We have over 160 partners across the country, including tribal colleges, Native organizations, tribes, universities, and satellite centers. To do this work, we emphasize tribal sovereignty by responding to community needs and requests for their research priorities. We ensure that tribal data is protected and that community is present in all stages of research. I will now share some information on NEAR. So Natives Engaged in Alzheimer's Research Project is a multi-site, multi-principal investigator initiative that is bringing together tribes, academic institutions, urban Indian programs, and Native community groups together to address Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. NEAR aims to understand, intervene on, and mitigate ADRD health disparities experienced by American Indian, Alaska Native people, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders as well. The research team includes investigators and project leads from these communities. As a part of the overall NEAR program, the Recruitment and Engagement Core uses strategies designed to stoke interest in research and treatment advances, both in communities participating in their project. These strategies come from those recommended by the National Institutes on Aging for recruitment and retention in ADRD research. The REC partners with a network of community partners, including satellite centers, which are led by American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander investigators, representing a diverse cross-section of academic and community partners. The REC, alongside satellite centers, are addressing ADRD research readiness and education via novel, brain train, Workshops. The Brain Train is a hands-on educational workshop for community members that utilize visual and interactive learning methods. Activities include self-administered tests of cognition, grip strength, measurement, and blood pressure checks. If this is an interest in your community, please reach out to us via the contact info on the final slide of today's presentation. Another activity as a part of the NERREC is to host quarterly webinars on cognitive impairment, caregiving, dementia screening, and other topics that are important for community partners to address ADRD. Today is one of those webinars, and we look forward to more. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Dr. Jordan Lewis. Dr. Lewis is Aleut or Nunga from the native village of Naknek and is the Associate Director of Memory Keepers Medical Discovery Team and a full professor with the Department of Family Medicine and Biobehavioral Health at the University of Minnesota Medical School, Duluth campus. He is trained as a cross-cultural community psychologist and social worker and a credentialed professional gerontologist. We're delighted to have him share his expertise today. Welcome, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for that introduction. And thanks to Dr. Ferguson and Grace and Cole for coordinating all this and making it happen. So I will share my screen. You see that okay?
Looks good.
Okay, great. So I'm honored to be here and share about the work we've done actually as part of the Native Elder Research Center, which was the Native Investigator Development Program under the leadership of Dr. Spiro Manson. So it's kind of exciting to bring this work back to this affiliated center under Deidre Buchwald and Spiro Manson and the incredible team they've created. But really wanted to give a chance to talk about some of the caregiver work we've done in Alaska and how this work has really established a foundation for a lot of work that's continuing on in Alaska, but also in American Indian communities here in Minnesota. So just give a brief outline. First, I'll talk about who am I, and thanks to Dr. Ferguson for the introduction. I'll give more insight on who I am, where I'm from, how I got interested in this kind of work, and then kind of shifting gears into talking about really briefly who our caregivers are, some historical impacts on caregiving experiences, and then getting more into the data from our research on caregiver well-being, and then really letting the words of our caregivers speak for themselves. As a researcher and someone who works with communities, I'm a really strong believer in letting the voices of our elders, of our caregivers, of our community members be at the forefront of all our research. We can do all the analyses, but I really like to provide a lot of quotes that kind of illustrate what this work has meant to them. And then ending with some lessons learned and closing thoughts. So a little bit about me. As Dr. Ferguson said, Unangang or Aleut. I grew up in Naknek. Up until third grade, I lived there full time, where my mother's side of the family are from. Grew up there as commercial fishermen. My family still fish there every summer. My dad's side of the family are from Portland, Oregon. And so growing up, my parents got married when I was in third grade. And then from then on, we spent our winters on the Oregon coast and our summers fishing. And my mom was a strong believer in spending time with our elders every day, as we were able to, if we weren't busy fishing, including, family members and elders in our communities in general. I'm also a big believer, and I think it's because my dissertation committee chair was a strong advocate that photos speak louder than words. And so I try to include a lot of photos in all of my presentations. So on the left here, you can see I've included family members, my parents there on the top left with their first grandchild, my sister's first child, and she lives in Seldovia with her family. In the middle photo there is my late great-grandparents, the late Paul and Anna Chacon, and also next to them is my late grandfather, Gordon McCormick. They lived independently in Naknek until their mid-90s. In the bottom picture there are my grandparents, maternal grandparents. They retired in La Paz, Mexico, and that's their rose garden. And so they, to me, are role models or inspiration for healthy aging. So I was actually born in Portland, Oregon, at Oregon Health Sciences University. My mom was going to college at Reed. And back then, you were not allowed to stay in college if you were pregnant, so she had to drop out. I'm the oldest of four. I have one brother and two sisters. They all are together. My brother's expecting his first child with his wife. They live in Naknek now. And I've lived across the United States, whether it's for education, for a career, in American Indian Alaska Native health research. This photo here is my sisters and my mom at our fishing site in Naknek. That's a picture of me. I was actually born prematurely. I had gastroschisis, so I was in the hospital for 18 months, and that was the first outfit I got to wear after being released from the hospital. And then that's my mom and I in Seattle. So a visual person, this is Naknek. It's at the mouth of the Bristol Bay, the Naknek River. If you're from the region, Dillingham's our other big community in Bristol Bay. That's our main road there. And then the other side, growing up in a small town on the Oregon coast, people from the Pacific Northwest may have been here, Canna Beach. It's surprising now, and I'm realizing how much older I'm getting when I ask people if the photo on the left looks familiar. 10, 15 years ago, exactly everyone in the audience would know what it is. Nowadays, it's one or two people. But Canna Beach is actually where Goonies was filmed, and also Kindergarten Cop. So I was blessed to grow up in both these small communities in beautiful places. And it really instilled in me the importance of community, not only in well-being and our health, but family cohesion being supported. So as we shift gears a little bit, this idea, we talk about this notion of keeping elders at home all the time. It's important for their health. It's important for their well-being. A lot of our research shows that it's, critical for everyone. It's what everybody wants. Ideally, if we could have a care facility in every community, that would be ideal. But from talking to our caregivers, talking to the elders, not only in this study, but in our family members, in our successful aging work, we're keeping them home, one, because we're respecting the wishes of our elders. Many of them want to be at home, whether they already live there or they want to go back to their home community. We also know from a community psychology perspective, this enables our communities, our families to maintain that unity, maintain those social and community connections, to reduce isolation. We know they're surrounded by loved ones. They want to pass on at home if possible. On the other side of that, of course, we know that relocating anyone really, elders, young people of any age, can have a negative impact on your physical, emotional health, your spiritual health, your connection to your culture and your community. My original dissertation interest was actually looking at whether or not the elders' presence in a community maintains community well-being. And so when elders are there, we do know that there's a stronger sense of community, stronger sense of culture and community identity. So this is just a photo. It's a community in Bristol Bay. The kids in the grade school wanted to decorate all the dumpsters. And so this was one of the lessons that they wanted everyone to remember. This is just one that I felt was really relevant to the work that we do. So as an academic, of course, you got to look at the literature, what's important, what's out there, what hasn't been discussed. When we think about caregiving, it's really, I would say, a bulk of the literature now and is focused on negative outcomes, right? This idea that caregiving is very stressful, it's burdensome, which it's not to say it's not. And that's how a lot of research goes. You get funded, you got to focus on a problem. We also know that underrepresented groups or under-resourced groups report more barriers in accessing help. This is specifically for dementia caregiving. But we also know these same groups, whether it's African Americans, Asian Americans, American Indians, Alaska Natives, they find strength and positive outcomes by serving in that role and having that honor to care for elders who've cared for them throughout their lives. And so if you do a literature search, which we've done, I would say it's increasing a little more each year, but very few studies have still looked at positive outcomes of caregiving. And so we wanted to contribute to that literature and look at this idea of what we noticed in our research was this idea that, yes, caregiving is demanding, but this population of Alaska Native caregivers tended to talk about the challenges, but kind of gloss over and say, well, yes, there are challenges, but there were unexpected blessings I wasn't expecting. So also in the literature, as you think about caregiving, and this is a policy perspective that we're trying to look at in Alaska to change, is this idea that caregiving goes in one direction. So you have a caregiver and a care recipient. If you want to receive services, Alzheimer's Association, for example, you can bring in one caregiver. If you think about the families a lot of us come from, I know in my family, multiple people cared for my uncle who passed away from Alzheimer's. And so if you're trying to get resources, who's going to be that one caregiver that steps into that role? That automatically changes their relationship to the person with dementia, the relationship to their providers, the relationship to the organization. And so trying to get organizations, agencies, programs to think about this idea that maybe multiple caregivers can come in, and maybe each time that person with dementia comes in, someone different can accompany them. We also know that caregivers experience rewards. In the little bit of literature that's out there, they talk about emotional rewards, cognitive rewards, behavioral, spiritual, as well as interpersonal. But what is interesting is that some of these studies have found that it's not something that's expected. None of the studies found that caregivers said, well, actually, I'm going to take this on because it's going to be an amazing experience. It's something they wanted to do. We found that, and it is the case for some people, but most likely this happens as due to unexpectedly, or it's not something you're planning for. But in the end, they found that role they fill very personally meaningful. And then in our research and our contribution to the literature is that the caregivers we talked to said, these lessons and rewards I learned from this caregiving journey are not time sensitive. They're not only applicable during the caregiver journey. Some of them talked about this idea that, 15 years after the caregiving for their mother or their father or their family member or someone else, these lessons, these rewards, these blessings come up in random ways, and they reflect back positively on that experience. So to give some statistics, and this is a few years old, so it may be a little different now, but as of a couple of years ago, 90% of elder care in Indian countries provided by a family member. When you think about how high that is, in the US population, 29% of family members provide care to an older adult. So you can see still a lot of focus on family support and family care and caring for our own. So when we talked about caregiving, one of the challenges we're faced with in recruitment for racial, ethnic minority, under-resourced populations is this idea that caregiving is not a term a lot of people are familiar with, or they don't consider themselves a caregiver because it's something that they do automatically. It's an honor it's an honor to respect and care for our elders. It's something we're raised to think about and that we do. We step into that role without being asked, and allowing our elders to live at home, as we talked about earlier, contributes to family and this idea of community well-being. And really this idea that, these elders or people with dementia are people who've raised us. They may have been in their homes. They may have taught us things that as we were growing up. And so this is our opportunity to allow them to age with dignity and respect, but also respect their wishes to remain at home where they've spent their entire lives and have so many memories and family supports. So as we think about the history, and for a lot of us, who know Native history, and this has, nothing new really, these have impacts on families as well as the caregiving experience, and for a variety of different reasons. So this was an area of our research that surprised us a lot, is how much some of the history of the people with dementia was unknown to their own family members. And so, for example, the history of death, famine, foreign diseases, introduction of missionaries and boarding schools. We're noticing now, and specifically in Alaska, relocation due to climate change, or now referred to as climate refugees. This idea that being asked to move your community may bring back memories of boarding schools or relocation. Substance misuse in families, whether in the past or currently. And I notice I have relocation there twice, but also this idea, the second aspect of relocation would then be this idea of having to make that difficult decision to move your family member to a care facility outside of your own community, but maybe even your own region of Alaska, to an urban setting that may be difficult to visit more than a couple times a year. So what impact do these have? As we think about, as the disease progresses, some of these memories may come back, whether they're positive or negative. We know there's a decline in the transmission of language, history, oral culture. Changing in family structures. You can imagine if your grandma has to move to Anchorage, what that does to the grandchildren who don't have that opportunity to learn from their elders. You're losing family history. There's not a chance to really learn more stories about your family, the community, family recipes, historical trauma. You're hearing about abuse and neglect. As the disease progresses, we're hearing from caregivers that they didn't know their grandma was in a boarding school. That was something she never talked about, but as the memories are coming up when she was younger, they're starting to learn these things. We also know dietary changes, whether it's more processed foods, less access to traditional foods, whether it's due to not having those resources or someone who can help you access those, or you're moved to a facility or somewhere that doesn't have readable access. We also know this has led to a mistrust in the healthcare system due to the minimal resources related to dementia across the Indian healthcare system, across the healthcare system in general. And then you add that history of mistrust of, bad research, not trusting your providers, overturning providers, or even just one bad experience with a healthcare provider. You're more likely not going to go back if you suspect something that's a little scary like dementia. So for our research, we really wanted to start by looking at, how do our elders stay healthy as well as they're able to? What are the resources they access in their community and their family? And so out of all this data, these are the 5 things that caregivers talked about were important to them on their journey of caregiving that enabled them to stay healthy as much as they were able to. And you can see around the circle there, subsistence, community, extended family, the presence of spirituality or religion, and then maintaining connection to elders, whether that's within their own family or elders in the community. So now I'll go through each one a little more in depth to give you some more insight on what exactly the caregivers were talking about. So when they talked about family, they talked about this idea that for many of them, they had each other to support them through the caregiving journey, sharing responsibilities. For some family members, maybe someone was really good with the finances. Someone was really good navigating resources in the community. Someone was really good with doing the chores and keeping up with the home. So finding out what the strengths of each family member were and supporting each other on that journey. Being able to spend time with other family members. For some families, and this wasn't the case in a lot of them, this brought them together more and they were able to spend time whether with mom or with their grandma. And then as a result of this experience, also it enabled them to also learn how to or ask for family members to provide support, wanting to offer time for, your sister to go do something or really find ways for the family to come together, support each other, but also provide support that they could take time off, go on vacation, go check the mail, or take a weekend off from their care duties. So more photos. These are not specifically caregiving photos, but they're photos of my family and the importance of family to me. So the top left is my great grandfather and his cousin, Paul Chacon, in a wooden sailboat in Bristol Bay. My husband and I there in the bottom left. Our 2 sons there in the middle, William and Cody, we've adopted. And then my top right there is my aunt and uncle. My uncle just passed away last month from dementia, and my aunt's in the early stages, so being able to spend time with them. And then the bottom right there is my immediate family, with my paternal grandmother who passed away from dementia last year, my dad's mom. That was my sister's wedding in Canada Beach a few years ago. So when caregivers talked about this idea, the importance of community support differed a little bit more from family support, and then it extended out to resources and looking at how do you receive support from your community, whether it's, knowing that your neighbors are watching your family member who may wander or go outside and knowing that they'll be brought back. And then having that community support and able to maintain respect. This comes across more of educating the community on what dementia is, and that it's not, mistreating someone, they're over medicating them, but this is a disease, this is what's happening. Helps families maintain that respect by not only their other family members, but their own community. And also the community can see from these families who are doing this work and caring for their loved ones, that they're honoring and respecting their elders, at any stage of life. We're also hearing, this is more related to work here in Minnesota, but intergenerational programming at the community level. For example, there's a tribal nation here that actually provides a 1-week dementia training class for the third graders. So every third grader is aware of what dementia is, and the community found that they decided to implement that program because they're realizing that when third graders go home, they may be the only person home with their grandma who may have dementia, or their grandfather or somebody. Some more community photos. Interior on the right, and then this is the Elder Center in Naknek on the left. So in the third resource, the caregivers talked about the importance of connection to elders, whether that was their elder in their own family, elders in their community. But they talked about this idea that as they were going through this caregiver journey, spending time, whether they were at home all day with them, at home when they were able to, through interactions, they were able to learn family recipes, they learned family stories. They may have learned things that they didn't know about their grandma, their grandfather. They talked about the importance of finding ways to get out of the house together, whether it's going for a ride, going for a walk, doing activities that were outside of the house that were safe. And this also was important to them that their grandchildren got to spend time with their grandparent. Despite the disease process, having those interactions, they saw not only had an impact on the grandchildren, but the grandparents also had a positive impact in those interactions. So the fourth resource, part of this idea of caregiver well-being, the importance of staying active, walking with your elders, maintaining social connections to your family and your community. Food and diet was also important. And through these interactions with their loved ones, they learn maybe different teachings on how to put food away, subsistence foods, native foods. They all talked about, they may not be able to leave the home, they may not be able to go harvest and gather traditional foods, but they always were receiving resources from the community, from other family members. They also encouraged people to come over and share food together. This was a way to share stories, share this knowledge. And really the other unexpected outcome of that was demystifying what dementia was and reducing that fear that it's something that's scary. And so spending time with someone with dementia hopefully educates the community members and families more. And another part that caregivers talk about is, yes, subsistence foods are important, but also finding time to be on the land. I find it very healing, it's very grounding, it could be their form of respite, even if it's just for 10 minutes. So finding time to eat your native foods, but also find time to leave the home and get out on the land. It's really important to their well-being and being able to stay on this journey. Some foods here, some salmon berries there on the left, and then some smoked fish or canning smoking fish at our home. So the last resource was spirituality and religion. And spirituality and religion are differentiated because in the research we've been doing in this study, spirituality can encompass more traditional practices of spirituality. Spirituality is people understand it themselves. And the notion of religion is much more of a Western notion of, for example, attending church. Caregivers varied on this spectrum. Some had both present in their lives, some more spiritual, some more religious. But they talked about having that presence in their life increase their mental strength. Really was a coping strategy, offered respite by going to church, provided a sense of community, whether it was going to church for that hour or 2 hours. They felt supported, they were able to have other people to talk to, felt that a strong connection to their higher power. And also they talked about it connected them to their family in a different way as well. And actually, as an outcome of this study, a medical student who's now finished his residency and is back in Alaska, worked with churches in Anchorage to find out, can we provide respite or adult daycare during church for people who are caregivers of people with dementia? So they can go to church and the person with dementia can be at the church at the same time and be in a safe environment and not have to worry about being at home, or the caregiver can't keep going to church, which was an outstanding outcome of this research, that churches were excited about that. Actually, a couple of them have implemented that program. So it's the church in the top there is the church in Perryville, and then the one down below is where I was actually baptized, and my great-grandfather run that church for 40 years in Naknek. Fortunately, it's about to fall off the cliff due to erosion, but there are still a lot of memories there. They also talked about the importance of traditional music and dance. They just said whatever that looks like, whether they can listen to their favorite native music, their favorite just regular music, and finding time to have fun and dance, whether it's in their own community, dance group, or just at home. And of course, humor and laughter. Every caregiver, this comes up in every interview of every study we've ever done. The importance of humor, the importance of being able to laugh at yourself, to laugh at life. It kind of helps you cope. And so these are some fun photos here. This is Dr. Elizabeth Flegel and I at a work retreat in Bainbridge Island several years ago. And then there's her down there again. And then the late Dr. Howard Luke from Fairbanks, were people we love to laugh with a lot. So what are the benefits? So as we looked at this work, we learned about what they do to stay healthy, what resources they need, how can we replicate those resources and for other caregivers we haven't talked to or will become caregivers. They talk about these benefits, right? They realize that they're giving the life the elder wants. This is what their wishes are. They also realize through this process that they're healing their family at some level. It may not be immediate, but it's a starting process. They're recognizing these intergenerational connections they didn't think were possible because they thought the disease would prevent that. They also talked about, we learned our history. We learned family stories. We learned family recipes. We learned things about my family I never would have known had I not been the caregiver for them. So I want to provide the next few slides or quotes from our caregivers, just to give you more insight on their experiences and what they felt were their blessings and what they learned from this experience. One caregiver said, I had a lot of very valuable time with my grandmother. And out of all of my cousins, I'm the only one, aside from my brother, that can say that. We took the time to spend time with her, even with everything going on in our lives. We were there to listen to her stories, even if we've heard it 20 times that day. And those are memories I will have for the rest of my life. And so another, despite there are challenges, there are still things that they never really talked negatively about it. They never said this was a burden. Every caregiver we talked to said, if given a chance, I would do this again. And this caregiver shared with us, I'm so glad I spent time with my grandmother. She might have driven me crazy at points in my life, but I wouldn't change it for the world. And this caregiver really focused on this idea that they're giving their parents an opportunity to see life continue to unfold, see things change in society. And she shared, I'm glad that I've given my parents good caregiving so they can see this day, to actually witness this day and know all this work was worth it. I was able to help my parents live to see moments and create new moments. And in this situation, she was talking about, a lot of the elders we worked with grew up, my great-grandparents grew up in a sod house. And now they live long enough to have a microwave and a car and a four-wheeler. And so being able to provide that support to let your loved ones, your parents live long enough to see these changes and create new moments was important to them. And this caregiver shared, being around my mom was such a joy. We had our own spats throughout our lives together, but this was my chance to be with my mom. So I didn't care how many times she told me the same story. None of that made any difference to me because I was just happy to be with her. To help her was special to me, and there was no drawbacks to it. It was just something really fun to do just to get closer to her. And even those small things, even though there weren't a lot of big moments for this caregiver in terms of learning new things from her mom, spending that quality time together enabled her to really have a strong relationship. And when she passed, she felt really good about the life that she let her mom live. So the next few caregivers talk about this idea of bringing generations together, or weaving generations together. One caregiver shared, caring for your elders is important because it affects not only my generation and then my grandkids' generation and then their kids' generation. It's the indigenous way of thinking, 7 generations forward and 7 generations back. All these people are affected by my mom being around for 3 or 4 more years. I'm not trying to make a big deal out of it, but it's one way of thinking when you go into the profession of taking care of another life or trying to help that person live a quality life that is meaningful. This is such a powerful quote. And even in our successful aging data, this idea that you're aging well because your life has meaning. And we need to remember, and this caregiver is reminding us that despite having dementia, people still have this desire to be wanted, to have purpose, to have meaning in life. And she was able to do that for her parent. And this caregiver shares from the perspective of her granddaughter, what it was like having grandma at home. She said that was probably the best time in her life that she got to spend with her grandma. She said, thank God we had grandma, because that was her crutch when her dad left, and she had that support and something to hold on to. And then another caregiver shared with us, I never felt that mom was a burden because we had 5 kids and tons of extended family. She lost her parents when she was 2 or 3 to influenza. I never got to know my grandparents, and my kids loved her. And we told her that we are going to do everything we can to support her. We thank God every day that we had her in our lives. Ultimately, I think the goal of every caregiver we've talked to, and I think the goal of every caregiver in many communities, is to keep your loved one at home for as long as possible, with the goal of letting them pass at home. We know it can get challenging, and it's not the goal, not able to happen for some people, but she was able to do that. She had the support of her kids and her grandkids and her family. Another caregiver shared, whatever wisdom and knowledge they can share with us that they remember. And sometimes they tell us over and over and over, and maybe they know it's for our good, and sometimes it's dementia. Sometimes they'll just repeat themselves over and over and over and over and over. And we can't say, oh, we just heard that, Grandpa. Having respect for them, we let them repeat themselves over and over and over so we get it in our head. This is an interesting quote as you think about this idea that elders teach by example, by leading. We sit and listen. Sometimes they tell stories, and there's meaning in those stories that we find out as we reflect on them later in life. This idea that, yeah, maybe they're telling us over and over and over because it's dementia, but also it could be because they really want us to know what they're telling us and not to forget it. And this idea that the way to see that disease is maybe not as negative as other research would show. So to summarize these lessons our caregivers talked about, given a second chance, all these caregivers were raised by the parents. Now is their chance to have a different approach or a different look on the relationship with their parent, either as the caregiver, as someone who's helping provide support. Through these interviews with caregivers, we learned that historical events have altered family and community relationships in some way. Not always negative, sometimes positive. And through the caregiving, it provides opportunities for families to heal, whether it's trauma, unresolved grief, unresolved conversations. Over time, they'll learn that maybe it's improving or strengthening those relationships, learning how to heal, improving communication, not only between the person who's the caregiver and the person with dementia, but improving communication across the family, but also across the community. And we also have learned that multiple generations are positively impacted by elders who are able to stay in the community, and that their cognitive changes may be challenging, but maybe also educating communities about what dementia is and educating family members on how to think differently about providing care. We also learn that repetition and storytelling ensures families that their history will be preserved. Those are stories they'll never forget. They're recipes they won't forget. They may also learn that there's some history, but we also have to remember that despite dementia, changes related to the disease, these individuals are still our family. We have a common history. We have this instilled value that we care for our elders regardless of the situation. And that even in challenging times, there are glimpses or reminders of good memories and who they were and who they still are today. So closing thoughts, as Elizabeth says, this is our path to healing, summarizing the importance of the work that we do and why we do what we do. Caregiving is an opportunity to give back to those who took care of you. It's an honor to have that ability. It's a natural part of the Indigenous way of thinking to care for someone else, whether it's your elder or someone else in your family, your community. We've learned through these caregivers that it's a time of constant growth, education, self-reflection, and healing. And while it can be extremely challenging, we have learned from these caregivers that benefits arise during and after the experience and continue to remain influential for some of these caregivers 10, 15 years later. And they told us that, the lessons taught to us by our elders when we're young continue to play throughout our lives and eventually become lessons we pass on to the elders we care for as their caregiver. And then finally, spending time with family provides opportunity to heal from the past and pass on a new understanding of history to our kids and move forward. The late Howard Luke has a wonderful quote that I always like to share. My mom always said to help one another. You make yourself stronger, and by helping them, you help yourself. So just some quick acknowledgements. There's people that were involved in this really exciting work and continue to build this work out across Alaska. I just want to acknowledge them and the funders. And would like to entertain any questions, comments, conversation. I will stop sharing so I can see more people. But thank you for your time.
Kagasaka, thank you, Dr. Lewis. Wonderful presentation, and so beautiful to see Dr. Howard Luke has influenced so many of us with his wisdom and the wonderful research that you've done with our elders, and just the beauty of keeping them home and the stories. So thank you for such an inspiring presentation. I'd like to invite questions at this point, either in the chat, the question and answer box. I know at this point, this webinar will also be shared on our website, and a lot of folks shared that they might not be able to make it real time, but will watch this asynchronously. So this will continue to gift others that will be able to view this website at another time. Any questions? So I've got one. So do you have any stories of elders who have traveled home to be with their families and be surrounded by their community in their last days? And if so, any stories that come to mind? I know that this has been a trend that we're hoping to see more opportunities for folks, and as well as healthcare providers to support elders and families in our more rural communities. Do you have any stories or bright spots in that space?
It's a great question. Not off the top of my head. I do know, kind of related, that COERC is actually in the process of developing a death doula program to really bring back traditional practices around passing on, with the hopes that we can actually bring people back and it will change the understandings of those. Like, I still think death scares a lot of people, and it's that thing that we don't talk about till it's in our face. And so hopefully through these conversations, I will be more open to that. I unfortunately, I think in this research, a lot of the people who passed on were not at home due to the need for more advanced care that's only provided in a larger medical setting. And I think the challenge with that is how, if you can get them home, is it going to be hospice? And that's a little less intense than like more advanced care needs. So that would be wonderful. I think the Denali Center has done a phenomenal job. I know they don't bring, as far as I know, they don't bring them home at the end of life. They may now, but they have a going away program where every year a resident gets to go home for up to a week with all medical care provided in the community. So if you need dialysis, if you need a social worker, if you need a medical doctor, Denali Center will send you home for a week with your full care team. And so that's one model I think we could also look at replicating in terms of getting people home. I would say with the younger generations more open to these ideas, we're going to see a bigger movement towards elder care and getting people home.
Thank you. Yeah, because so much of our culture is place-based, right? So when you look at birthing practices and dying practices without elders at home and able to be with their community and families during their last days, you miss out on those cultural practices and rituals and ceremonies, and so much a part of the vitality of our cultures. And so I'm just really excited to see forays into that space to help support communities and healthcare providers as well with training so that they can provide the best care to elders and take away some of that fear of being home. You know, sometimes I think we have we have an unrealistic view of what it is like to die in a hospital or in a hospice program in a large city compared to being at home. So I'm excited to see those programs grow. And we have a comment in the chat box here. It says, "Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate the view that caregiving is a dynamic relationship and that the care recipients are active and contributing participants in this relationship and in the community." From Maria. Thank you, Maria, for that reflection.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think in response to that comment, there's so much of the notion that once you are diagnosed with dementia, like you can't do anything else, right? Like this idea that, well, you're losing your cognitive abilities, so you're not able to do as much. And from the perspective of people with dementia, which surprisingly is not much literature either in terms of what do you want to do in terms. So there's one study in the entire country that I've been able to find that as the disease progresses, they still have a need to be generative, to pass on their knowledge, even though they have dementia, they're still people. And so I think that's an interesting perspective that we should highlight more, is that they are contributing members even up to the last stages of life.
Well, and quality of life with culture and family and community around you. You know, I'm going through a dementia journey with my own family member right now with my dad. And I notice when we have family and community surrounding him and, you know, some familiar music and that his quality of life is so much higher, and his ability to feel good during the day and to feel like it's a quality day increase. So I think all of these bring those, as you shared in your research, you know, the qualitative factors of just the elders being respected up until their dying day, regardless of whether or not dementia is a part of that journey. So this is very important work that needs to continue to expand as we look at seeing these positive outcomes, as well as examples of families and communities that have taken extra steps to embrace this value and respect of elders.
Right. Yeah, I think it's, from a research perspective, it's too easy for us to get caught up in these evidence-based practices, right? Like, okay, they've developed these interventions, they've developed these programs, that we forget to ask the elders themselves, what do you like to do? I mean, I've had social work students who've never been around an older adult ever in their entire lives. Of course, they're 20, but this idea that these are the future people who are going to care for elders, hopefully, that even a simple, like, what's your favorite type of music, or what kind of food did you like these simple things that just being a human being, we forget to ask, that have a huge impact on our quality of life.
One, and so much of your journey also, Dr. Lewis, is personal, right? With your own family and the Native community that you come from, and you know how your Native community has surrounded elders, and you know, these traditions that we have culturally of really respecting our elders and not just putting them in a home, right? I think that a more Western society's perspective, which really is quite egregious at times, where elders end up in facilities and lonely, right? And just some of your statistics about how such a high number of our elders are being cared for by families and community versus those that are non-Native. To me, I thought that was really a beautiful reflection on our Native community and our values in action.
Right. And now we just need to increase awareness, because, you know, we've heard stories in small communities in Alaska that there'll be 4 or 5 caregivers of someone with dementia. They never even knew they were caregivers. Like, I mean, you know, village of 200 people, 5 is pretty high to be caring for someone with dementia that you have no idea, because you're either isolated or you're busy being a caregiver. That finding ways to build that community of caregivers to support each other, I think would have a huge impact.
Mm-hmm. And it's not even something that you consider as a burden per se. It's just, it feels good to give. And then the beauty of those stories and the connections and, just knowing that your your elder is cared for, and that brings a lot of joy.
Right. Yeah. The flip side, of course, maybe not the flip side, but the challenge with that is this idea that many of the caregivers we talk to also don't trust people to come into the home. So how do you find that fine line of take 2 hours and go do something for yourself? They're going to be okay, like, because you want to make sure your loved one's cared for properly, that eventually you just take on too much. And there's a point where you need to, how do we get caregivers to accept that help? Because they don't want to burden someone else by having them come in and do it. And then it's their cultural duty, their responsibility to care for mom. So you've seen challenges there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and training the program that you mentioned that brings young people into what is dementia. I think that's also a brilliant reflection of what's possible, so that it's not a mystery.
Right.
And elders and being around elders, and those of us who grew up in cultures where elders are integrated into our community and pretty much every aspect of our community. I mean, there's issues related to elders and smells in elders' homes, and durable medical equipment, to being comfortable around that for elders on oxygen or other kinds of devices. So it's not something scary, but it's something that is normal. The normalization of aging, right? Which,
right.
As a society, we keep ourselves segregated at times, at least in a Western society. And it's just again a beautiful reflection of our Native communities, and the fact that we want elders around, and we want them visible, and we want them in community.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, beautiful work. I know we're just about out of time here with the webinar today, but Dr. Lewis, your work continues to inspire. Thank you for this focus of your life's work for elders, and caring for our elders continues to build momentum. And I'm hoping that this will also be part of the policy changes and funding stream changes that can help our elders continue to have better care over the years. So I'm going to talk just a little bit more. So Natives Engaged in Alzheimer's Research, who helped sponsor this webinar today, we'll be having more webinars in the future, so please look out for those. We want to know more about what topics you'd like to learn about, so you can send those webinar ideas or questions to Cole Alec, who actually is over the near rec. He's conducting a brain train in Samoa currently, so he's unable to join us today, but Cole Alec will be helping coordinate those, along with Grace Shepard. I want to give her a shout out today for helping with our technology and making sure this was successful. And also Dr. Lewis's information is here. Please reach out to him. We're looking to grow this effort with elders and care for elders, especially as it relates to Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. So definitely a priority of those of us here at WSU iReach, and all of the amazing folks that we work with. So at this point, any final words to share, Dr. Lewis, as we close out our webinar?
No, just thank you again for this opportunity to share about our caregivers and the important work they're doing in our communities. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. And thanks to those who visited us real time today, and those of us who will be viewing this webinar asynchronously. Again, look for more near webinars in the future, and we wish you a great day. Kagasakuk, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lewis, and have a great day.